Pedro from A&P-REACTS. I'm here today with Brock from Panzerfaust to talk about himself, to talk about the man, the myth, the legend. How's it going?
You're far too kind, but I'm doing well, all things considered. Thank you for asking.
So we're here today to talk about the 5 albums that influenced you to get into metal or to pick up a guitar, perhaps start your own band. But before we talk about the albums, and before we even talk about your journey into the metal world, let me ask you this question. How much blood, sweat, and tears went into this one?
I would say a considerable amount. We've been working on this whole Sons of Perdition project for me, it's probably been the better part of a decade when I first started coming up with the idea for it, but just takes a lot of mental bandwidth to do a project in this way. And we've, with the right lineup we finally got, we've been able to really create a lot of material. Everyone's very much invested, so it makes it a lot easier to make a project like this happen. When you need to have everybody fully committed. That's what we have now. So I actually, funny enough, I had been living in our rehearsal space for the past 3 years, making those including the 3rd chapter, which is going to be released later this year. But I just recently moved out of there because it's only so long one can live without windows or running water. You know what I mean?
You're like a math actor, but with music. Like you really, if there's one guy that I know who really lives his art, it's you.
I appreciate that very much. I do. I mean, it's not qualified to do much else, eh?
I think you're selling yourself a little bit too short there. I think you don't get enough credit, at least in my perspective. And I don't think the band itself, I think Panzerfaust deserves a lot more attention and a lot more credit for what you guys do. You guys, to me, are definitely a band that's outside the box. And for a city like Toronto, you guys are a beacon of what metal could be in this city.
Yeah, I mean, Toronto, I mean, you know probably as well as I do, is there's a kind of like a cancerous element in the Toronto scene wherein people are reluctant to support one another, which I find is kind of unfortunate. You know, being in the scene for a long time, I know this. And of course, that's not the totality. It's not probably a completely fair way to summarize the whole scene, but there's certainly some of those elements in the scene which, you know, it's a plague on all houses, really. You know.
Yeah, I always feel, I get the vibe that it's almost like if we bring somebody up, that means we're taking somebody down. And I don't agree with that way of thinking at all. I think if Panzerfaust succeeds, then it opens the doors for other bands in Toronto to follow that same path, that same road into success.
I mean, there are no shortage of extremely talented musicians in Toronto. And I'm lucky enough to call some of them friends. And I hope for the best for them as well. I mean, I only have control over my own camp insofar as my ability is to control it. But I'd like to see more bands get more recognition from the city because there is some incredible talent within it. Just you need to know where to look.
Yeah, it's true, it's true. So before we get into the 5 albums that really, impacted you, how old were you when you picked up the guitar? How old were you when you started to listen to, heavy metal music in general?
Well, I started playing guitar when I was 8 years old. The first instrument I ever played was a violin, believe it or not, when I was 4. It was my mom who wanted me to learn an instrument, So I think at that point I might have been a little bit too small to even for a junior guitar. So I started picking that up, but I didn't really have much interest. But then when I turned 8, I started playing guitar. Then I got an electric guitar. That's where things started to change. So that was when I was 8 years old. I got my first electric guitar at Christmas and was pretty excited about it. So I've been playing for the majority of my life.
Did you get some lessons early on, or you're pretty much self-taught?
I did early on have some lessons when I was very young, and then my guitar teacher basically just said, he's like, look, there's nothing more that I can teach you. So, which I guess is a very honest thing to say, considering, you know, he's no longer going to have the income from my from me coming there. But yeah, no, and so at that point, I just, you know, I'm a firm believer. You kind of need to, everything you learn, you have to deconstruct everything and start again to really, if you want to start kind of honing your own path, right? So that's, I think, more or less what I did.
So that, how old were you when you decided that, okay, you know what, I love playing guitar, but I need to get into a band?
Well, funny enough, I think I was in 7th grade when I was, a friend of mine and his younger brother, who was actually in 5th grade, he played drums, and my friend that was in my grade played bass. And I think we played at some performance at our school, which is a song that I had written. We did. It wasn't like we did a cover song. We actually wrote our own song. We performed it, and it's, I mean, for whatever it's worth, you know what I mean? I don't know how old I was. I guess maybe I was 12 or something like that. But yeah, so I played guitar and I sang, and I mean, it was probably fucking brutal, you know what I mean? But it was, I guess that was the germinal moment, you know?
Yeah, that's when the light bulb went on.
Yeah, that's when I started doing it. And then, I mean, I started Panzerfaust when I was 14. I was very young. I started with the original drummer, and he was a year older, and we were from Mississauga, something of a dismal city, I must confess. You know? But we were like the only people we even knew who listened to black metal in the first place. And of course, when you're starting a band when you're 14, like what the fuck are you gonna write about? You know, you're just trying to imitate some of the people who inspired you to start it in the first place. You know, which is, I guess, maybe a decent segue to where we're heading in this.
Yeah, exactly. That's the perfect segue. So starting off with Mayhem, the Mysteries Dom Satanas, that's the first album that you mentioned as a huge influence for you. The album came out in 1994. So do you remember how old were you? This is their first studio album. Do you remember how old you were when you came across this record? I mean, this is an impactful record.
Well, shit. I mean, when it came out, I was barely out of diapers. But I mean, when I first discovered it, I would have been 13. So I went to a Catholic school, believe it or not.
Perfect for a black metal guy. I mean, like.
Well, yeah, that's like, you know, these religious. Well, the thing is, I guess for context for people who don't live in Ontario, it's actually a publicly funded system, is the Catholic school system, which probably shouldn't be the case. But neither here nor there. There's no other way you can guarantee a constant creation of non-believers than to have religious schools, right? So
yeah, it's true.
I was still in elementary school, and I found this website called blackmetalradio.com because I was listening to things like, you know, Metallica, shit like that, you know, and then I found this portal into a completely fascinating genre of music, and it was through this website, Black Metal Radio. So I found, I mean, a lot of the albums that we will talk about in this segment, I discovered there. So the Mystery Dom Satanas was one of those said records. I mean, that record is a little bit like when if you ask a journalist, well, who is your most influential writer? They're going to tell you Orwell, and they kind of you would expect it's like your kind of a traditional answer.
Yeah, it's the stereotypical answer to give, right?
Yes, exactly. But I mean, but there are reasons for that. You know, I mean, that was a record that, I mean, it quite literally changed the landscape. I mean, a song like "Freezing Moon," for example, is couldn't be a more iconic song in my estimation. Of course, you know, it opens up a funeral fog, and it comes in. It's just an album that kind of took me. Of course, you listen to Mayhem, and you start doing some of the back story of the band, and of course, it's something of a mythology at this point. And when I was younger, and it's still a story that fascinates me. I have to say, but I mean, back then it was just something that was quite surreal. So it kind of puts it into a context for you, which made it the extremity of it. When you're young and you're kind of at that this kind of rebellious stage, you're not sure what you're rebelling against. You know what I mean? It's likely authority, in which in my case was the religious one, because that was the one that was, I guess, impacting my narrow view of the world. But So yeah, anyways, it was,
It's funny you say that, because when I remember as a teenager when DS Side released one of their albums, and they had a picture on the back with a band, and Glenn Benton had the inverted cross on his forehead, and I remember a lot of my friends were like, "Man, maybe we should do the same thing." You know, I'm glad nobody did, but it just goes to show you, when you're a kid and you're heavily influenced by the music you listen, and you're rebellious, you just want to piss off the man, whoever that man is, you know?
and when you're younger, it's like there's something to be said for the music that one writes in their younger years, because it's filled with like unbridled emotion. It's charged with a kind of like an energy. It's like when you have a lot of things to be pissed off about, it gives you a lot of junk energy, as it turns out. So you can sometimes get some very iconic music that comes from that.
Going back into Mayhem, well, somewhat related to this album, but since we're talking about them, what are your thoughts on the movie, The Lords of Chaos?
Well, it's interesting because I remember I read the book many years ago, Lords of Chaos book, when it came out, and I know a lot of the people who are featured in that book say it's riddled with lies and mischaracterizations, and as far as I'm concerned, they're probably correct in their reflection on it. I mean, nonetheless, it was an interesting book. But then, of course, yeah, they made it into a movie, and I did watch it. And I mean, you can't help but think that what's his name? The guy who plays with Rory Culkin. I think it's the kid from Home Alone's brother. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
he looks so strikingly like Macaulay Culkin. So you always think like, oh, it's the guy from fucking Home Alone, you know, or Euronymous. So but I mean, that being said, they made I think it was very detailed in a lot of respects. There's a lot of like minor details. Like, for example, in Euronymous' office, there's a picture of Stalin on the wall, which is one of these things that he was known as being like kind of having some sympathies for Stalinism, probably because of its extreme nature. But it's just one of these little elements I thought that was interesting that they were able to put in there as a subtlety, which makes subtlety to me is quite important. And minor details just goes to show the ultimate work that went in the investigative work into understanding the story. And I mean, of course, there's some scenes that were, I would say, quite obviously quite violent, but like quite well filmed. That being said, I didn't think it was a tremendous movie at the end of the day, but it was certainly still interesting enough to watch. I don't know if I'll watch it again, but I think that's a story that's. I mean, look, it was made to be turned into a film.
yeah, true. That is for sure. I mean,
it's a real story that it would be an injustice for it not to be manifested into some kind of video format. But of course, some of the people who were involved in that story are still alive. It's not like it was done posthumously after everybody has passed away. So you're going to have some criticism from the people who are being featured in the film. Right?
Yeah, that's almost to be expected to a certain degree. So this record had a huge impact on you. Now, as you look back, so many years have passed, and you are able to reflect as being an older person now, understanding the world a little bit better, understanding the genre a lot better now than what you did when you first discovered the album. As you look back, how you reflect on that record? What do you take away all these years past from listening to that album and the experience that it gave you?
Well, I think it's those albums that you listen to or that you discover in your adolescent years or your formative years. They're always going to have that effect on you because it made you feel something. And that was one of those set albums that just made me feel something, and inspired me to start doing something, which is it's difficult to put into exact words as to what do you take from it. It's what the feeling you got from it. It's a feeling that you can always remember because
stays with you.
It just stays with you. Exactly.
Yeah. So the next album on your list, coming from the same nation of Norway, you got Immortal with Battles in the North, a bath.
Banger of an album, I have to say.
Yeah, what a record. I think this was his last album that he played drums on it, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure it was after Battles in the North. They got Horror Group and they did Blizzard Beasts, which I
Yeah.
mean, so that would talk about that record for a second. It would have been such a great record if the production wasn't so abysmally bad, you know. But yeah, yeah. But yeah, Abbott played drums on there, and there was something to be said for that. You know, it was very long. Wow, this is when Demon Eyes was still playing guitar too, and then he wrote some of the best guitar riffs, in my opinion, between Battles of the North and Pure Holocaust. Some of those riffs were they're just so iconic, you know, and they had like a really there's like a coldness to the whole. I mean, Immortal obviously has that kind of cold sound, but it's especially so with Battles in the North. I mean, the vocals were like just so raw that they always sound like they were kind of scraping through the mix. You know, it's like, well, I mean, you know, it's being in the Great White North, you know what a frigid breeze is like, or a free northern wind coming, and that's almost. It seemed like it was manifested in the whole overall outcome of all the music that they wrote, especially on that album. So it's what's I think most important to me is it doesn't matter necessarily how versatile a song is written. It's the ultimate atmosphere which it delivers. Battles of the North just absolutely has that.
So for you, that album, is it really is the atmosphere of that record that was the touching point for you beyond anything else, beyond vocals or one specific?
Yeah, well, I mean, of course, the ultimate product is what shines through the most. But I mean, if you deconstruct everything, I mean, the guitar riffs are fantastic. You know, he wrote some of the best guitars, and especially if you listen to early Panzerfaust, if you can find it somewhere, you can certainly see some of the influences that I had taken from some of that early Immortal stuff. Because that was, I think, was probably the first band that really I got like really into and really excited about. Because I got into the genre and there's albums, but then it was Immortal was the first band that I really got really into. That old Immortal stuff was just cold and raw, and it just spoke to me for whatever reason.
I think they were one of those bands that really captured the essence of where they were coming from. I mean, like Norway, you know, like the Norwegian black metal has its own sound, has its own DNA. But I think within that DNA, they were almost able to create their own string of DNA within their own, you know, within their own genre, within their own scene that they had there, you know?
Yeah, which is it's interesting because in the infancy of the genre, you had, and I don't want to miss any, but you just look at the Norwegian scene, you had Mayhem, you have Immortal, you have Dark Throne, you have Satyricon, you have Emperor. I mean, all these bands had, of course, were underneath that kind of black metal umbrella, but they had very different sounds. Like ultimately, they were all very much different from one another, even though they were in the same kind of camp. You know, it wasn't like, doesn't mean, of course, a lot in the late 90s, early 2000s, you saw a lot of carbon copies of some of the earlier stuff. So in whichever one of those camps that I just mentioned, you heard a lot of bands really just trying to emulate that sound exclusively. But in this case, when you have something that's happening and it's natural and it's genuine and it's honest, it will present itself authentically because is what it is, right?
Going back to Immortal, I have to ask you this: when Abath left the band, did you feel like that was the end of Immortal as Immortal, or do you feel like with him leaving, we end up with two bands that can still hold it?
Well, I mean, it's funny because they did that. I think it was Northern Chaos Gods, which
Yeah,
was more
2 years ago, I think, if I'm not mistaken.
very good album, I have to say. You know, I thought the songwriting was very good. It was very back to classic Immortal, which is more like the Battles of the North album we were talking about. I thought Demon Eyes did a very good job at doing the vocals as well. I thought it was still an authentic Immortal record, even though Abbott, as inimitable as he is, no doubt, the record was still very good. I mean, it's kind of a bummer because I mean, Abbott's doing his solo project. I think, from my understanding, they're back in the studio doing another record. He had something of a breakdown because of the grog.
They're in the studio right now recording, so I think we should have a new record by the end of the year on Season of Mist.
And I mean, I think those records are actually quite good. I mean, but it's not Immortal. I mean, Abbott is, like I said, he's about as inimitable as they come. And so he's somehow gotten away with operating in a genre which is generally to be taken quite seriously, but he injects I would not say it an undertone, I would say it's probably more of an overtone of humor to it. And one has to wonder how somebody gets away with something like that. But I think only he could.
It's a genre where I think most people take themselves super serious, and he almost is willing to be the meme of that genre to a certain extent. Do you feel that way?
Oh yeah, on a personal level, I think that if you can't laugh at yourself, you're probably a fucking douchebag. You know?
Yeah.
A capacity for irony goes a long way, and if you can laugh at yourself, it usually means you're probably a person that I would much rather
Spend your time with.
Spend my time with.
Yeah. So next on your list is Marduk with Panzer Division Marduk. This is an incredible album. This was their 6th album, if I'm not mistaken. And I actually went to the vault because I was almost sure about this, but I wasn't quite sure. I thought this was one of their shortest albums in length. It's like 30 minutes or just either 30 minutes on the dot or just like 29 minutes and change.
Yeah.
But it's such an iconic record.
Well, I mean, yeah, when I heard that album the first time, holy fuck, you know what I mean? That's probably where the name Panzerfaust comes from the most. It's sometimes erroneously attributed to the Dark Throne album, which it's not. It probably had more to do with this record because, I mean, I've always been like a student of history and the Second World War or something I've always found fascinating, and that was one of these albums that really just like took the, like if you thought about what a tank battle would sound like in musical form, that's Panzer Division Marduk right there. I mean, the whole album is blasted through the entire time, which some people might find undesirable. It might deter them from actually giving it a time of day because it's like, oh, well, it's not that much diversity. Never mind that. You know what I mean? That is an album that just plays it true the whole way. There's something about the late 90s production that they were just getting right at that time. And it wasn't like things were not being triggered and stuff. It was just like a really raw, powerful energy. And of course, and Morgan is, I think, probably the best guitar player in black metal. He certainly wrote more riffs and flawless riffs than I think any guitar player in the genre. And Panzer Division Marduk is just, to me, it's just a record that like it really just has, like I said, it's probably the consistent theme through the records we'll be talking about and have spoken about is albums that have an overall atmosphere and energy to them. And Panzer Division Marduk is absolutely one of those records.
Do you feel like that's a record that the shortness, perhaps, well, shortness, this is all relative, right? What's short and what's not. But when you think about the 30 minutes length, do you feel like that helps the playability of the record? Because it's so in your face, right? It's so abrupt, it's so demolishing that if this album was like an hour and 20 minutes, I mean, afterwards, you would have to go take a shower or something and decompress.
Yeah. I think, you have to be careful when you're composing a record, especially an album like this, which is, it's so fast and it's so aggressive that, I mean, if you were to have it maybe even another 10 or 20, 10, 15 minutes, you might actually be a diminishing return to play it longer because it doesn't need to be played any longer than it is. I mean, if you went, let's just go to the nth degree and we say it was double the length. I mean, I agree. It might just not have the desired effect that it does have with this shortening of the length. So they did it right. I think in my estimation, they did it just spot on.
Yeah, you have to keep all of these things in mind, right? Like, I mean, you're creating a record, you're creating almost a living organism to a certain extent that's going to live on forever because people are going to continue to listen to it. So you have to keep in mind the atmosphere, the length, and what you want people to get out of it. You can't kind of create one thing in a box outside of the realm of everything else that goes into it.
Yeah, I mean, there is certainly a such thing as overwriting an album, and it can blow back on you if you're not careful. So,
well,
yeah,
the The next two albums on the list, you need to school me on these ones because I'm not as familiar with these two as I was with the previous three.
Yes.
So I need you to take me to black metal school, not Catholic school, but black metal school, and perhaps a little bit more fun. So the next one on your list is That Spell Omega Kinos. I think that's how you pronounce it.
Yeah.
Tell me about this record. Like, what is it about this band and what is about this record that specifically appealed to you? They're from France, I believe, these guys.
Yes, they're from France. Well, Decibel Omega is an interesting band because they, I would argue that they're one of the most influential bands in taking the genre to another level, both musically and on an intellectual level. If you read the lyrics, you need to be fairly well read in certain literature, biblical literature, almost certainly. But the music itself, like the album that they released before us, the Si Monumentum record, I think it's probably the most influential record on modern black metal. For many reasons, they integrated a lot of a different kind of sounds, a different way of guitar playing. And so it's come to this record. It's only 3 songs.
It's an EP.
It's an EP, but it's fairly long considering it's 3 songs, and the compositions of the songs are incredibly interesting. The lyrical content, even more so, in my estimation. I'm a big literature guy, so this plays a big part. Whereas I think for a lot of people, it may not be such a important element. But it was because Decibel Omega is really created this extremely avant-garde, I guess to use that word, kind of unusual way of playing. The guitar playing is not necessarily just so chords, tremolo picked. There's a lot of accentuation in the way the guitar playing is played, and the composition is quite incredible. It takes some very skilled musicians to be able to compose music in this way. And this one, because I think some of their more recent albums have gotten, maybe the avant-garde element has gotten a little bit too at the forefront for my liking. I still like the albums, but the reason this one in particular is very influential for me is it had that it was kind of a crossover between that really avant-garde sound and that raw, old school black metal. So it was at a time where both of these things were hitting a cross current, let's say. This is the composition. It I think inspired me a lot in terms of my writing to maybe think about it a bit more. You don't want to think about it too much, like on Charles Bukowski's grave, it says, "Don't try." You shouldn't have to try. It should come roaring out of you. But it made me think, to maybe look at it a little bit deeper through a different lens. And so for me, this was an album that I think gave me an avenue to think about music a little bit differently. So that's what is most important about this record to me.
It's interesting because it almost sounds like this was like you said, this is 2 paths that are intersecting with this EP, and it's almost like they're leaving a little bit as they move forward. They left a little bit of one behind, and they took more of the other as they progressed. So this is perhaps their last release that has a little bit more of that raw background that got them going to begin with.
Yeah, because there was a certain point, they had an old vocalist, and they changed vocalists, and with that change, they also had a big sonic difference, because the old stuff is much more like a raw black metal approach. But there was a pivotal change actually before this record, but if this was the last record before it, I think there was something changed again. Mm-hmm. And for me, this was just kind of the
perfect storm.
Perfect storm, yes, absolutely. It's and you could. I don't think it'd be possible for them to recreate it. That's the magic of the times, right? So you make a record, you won't be able to recreate it, and nor should you be allowed to recreate it.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like records captured moments, right? And
Yeah.
moments in time and moments within the history of the band itself, right? So it's kind of hard to recreate those moments. I mean, a lot of bands try to because they want to reinvent that formula that worked in the past. But I
Well,
think
yes, if it works one time, it can be tempting to want to.
yeah, but I think it comes across as forced. It doesn't come across as organic as the original, and that's why the original worked because it was organic.
Well, you push you in an open door here. I couldn't possibly disagree with you, but
So, last record on your list, Funeral Mist Salvation, their
yes.
debut record.
This was not their debut record, no.
Was it?
No. They had a few before. There was.
I thought this was their first full length.
Yes, there's a first album, then they had Devilry, and then this one, Salvation, which is, I guess would be the third.
The third? Okay.
Yes. But my favorite album of all time.
Really?
Without a doubt, yeah. It's definitely the most inspiring album that I had ever heard.
Was it like a jaw-dropping moment when you heard it for the first time?
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, the album is dark enough to shame the devil himself. As far as I'm concerned. Yeah, it's this is just an album that just has such an interesting atmosphere. The vocalist, Mortis, who's the vocalist of Marduk now. This is before he had joined Marduk, and this is more or less his project. And in my judgment, he's the best vocalist in black metal, no contest. If you've ever seen him sing, if you listen to the performance on this record, it's otherworldly. Just as a kind of a way of using the vocals as an instrument rather than just being an element, which is one of the first times I had heard somebody use their vocals in this way. And of course, it's littered with a lot of samples. If anybody's ever seen the movie The Seventh Seal, which is it's a Swedish movie, I'm pretty sure. There's a lot of, had a very interesting soundtrack, and a lot of these are actually sampled throughout the album, which gives it a very interesting feel, because the vocals are so monstrous. I mean, I've never heard anyone even come close to being able to project the kind of atmosphere with the vocals like this. And it's incredible. And I went back and listened to all the albums that we were going to discuss here today. And so I was listening to it earlier today, and it still blows me away every time.
Well, when you listened to it for the first time, were you like, let me grab the phone, I gotta call somebody, like other people need to listen to this?
Oh yeah, that's what I mean. It's something that's really good that you can't help yourself, but like, hey, everyone, shut up. Listen, you know what I mean? It's and of course no one is ever as stoked about it as you are, but nonetheless, it's so important for them to hear it. It's just such an incredible record that I've still never heard anything quite like it. Right? It just still amazes me to this day.
Are you still looking for the next record that will surpass it, or you think that this album is so unique in the way it's put together that it's just it stays on its own?
Never going to have that record specifically done again, nor should it be done. And that needs to be done. It needs to be its own icon, not to be attempted to be redone. But I mean, I've had very few records that hit me like that record hit me. I've had a couple in recent years, which we can talk about if you'd like. You know what I mean? That have really kind of struck a chord with me.
Yeah, give me a couple. Like, what have you heard recently outside of these top 5 that influenced you? What have you recently listened to that had like a long-lasting effect?
More modern. I think probably the last record that really hit me was by an American band called Lord Mantis. The vocalist in the band is a friend of mine, Charlie Fell, and we had toured together. He was playing with a different band at the time, but that was the first time I been shown the record by him, and we were sitting in a campground in the hinterlands of the American frontier somewhere, and he had put this thing on, and I think we were drinking a bottle of like $11 whiskey, 60-ounce whiskey from Walmart. So somewhere in the Midwest, somewhere, right? And we put this record on. It's like literally the most disgusting sounding record I've ever heard. Like the production is just like it's like if the whole room was just filled with distortion, you know. And he has an interesting way of presenting his vocals, because he does a lot of things where like repetition, in the sense where it's like when he uses his vocals, it almost sounds like it's fucking stabbing you in the chest repeatedly. It really does have that effect. And there's at one point we're sitting there, and he's kind of a crazy guy, you know, as a pretext, but he's looking at me, and there's one part where the word mask keeps getting repeated, and he's looking at me going, mask, sticking his finger down his throat, and he's staring me in the face, you know. So it gave it a additional effect, you know, and it's still one of my favorite modern day records.
It was like listening to an album in 4D.
Yes, yeah. It was quite interesting. I mean, another record actually that just came out that's on our label, Eisenwald, as well as our dear friends in Wada, who, I mean, there's probably no band in the world that we have such a profound relationship with. We've done a few tours together, and we've had some times that I would not trade for the world. What was interesting is when we were doing the Spectral Storm tour in Europe, I guess it would have been in 2019.
2019, yeah, you guys did that tour together.
And it was about a week off. We spent in this small town in Germany, in this old, this house must have been built in 18 something. I can't really remember. It was older than anything we would be living in this former dominion of the Queen. But, we had a chance that, because we're both working on new albums. In this case, we were working on Sons of Perdition 2, and they were working on Gin, which is the album that they had just released. I think it was just shortly after we released Sons 2, and so it was interesting. We were able to like sit there and listen to it. We were showing each other our demos and stuff, and it was just like really, it's a very personal thing to share music with somebody, especially before it's released. So it's just like really interesting. We're just sitting there and we're drinking, listening to each other's music, and genuinely listening to it, not like sitting there and talking over it, you know, which I think is disrespectful to do that. If someone is kind enough to show you their music, it's incumbent upon you to listen, and to listen with
ears,
care and sincerity. Yeah, and it was just a very special moment. We got to sit there and just really listen to each other's music, and it was very very nice time to have that. And it's a phenomenal record, because I know how hard they worked on it. I mean, it's one of the hardest working bands that I've ever come across. And I'm very glad to call them our dear friends. So
actually, I think the last time that we saw each other in person was at their show in Toronto. Yes. I think it was back in 2019 as well. If I'm not, well, yeah, it has to be, because last year there was no shows.
It was definitely, I think it was early winter of 2019, more or less. And that was at
the Velvet Underground.
Yes, they played with 1349.
Exactly. Yeah.
Cloak that they were playing with.
Yeah, Cloak was on that bill as well.
That's correct. Yeah. So yeah, they fucking stole the show that night. I think it would be fair to say. I mean, it's, if you just look at the reaction from the audience, it was almost certainly they stole the show. Not to take anything away from 1349, of course, but Water really, they're a very, very powerful live band. And
I think they're a band that you could definitely get a sense for who they are when you listen to their records, but I don't think you really are able to understand who they are as musicians until you see them live. It's a completely different experience.
Yeah, I know they had some bullshit online stuff, because I think they played a festival in Mexico, and
yeah, there was some issues with some band members, and they've had some problems, I guess.
No, I did, but that's something different. I think they were playing in Mexico. I think Monterey Metal Fest or something, and it was like one of these just like unbelievably hot days in Mexico, and they're all in these black robes playing, you know, against the sun, and I think something happened. They had to end the show a little bit early. I'm not sure if that's exactly what happened, but something along those lines. And they got a lot of flack about, you know, you just played a black little band, you can't stand the heat. It's like, shut the fuck up. You know what I mean? I know how hard those guys work, and they work fucking hard. You know what I mean? They are road dogs, and you know, so it's easy for people behind their keyboards to say how how they uh, how they didn't fulfill their duties or something. But it's like, look, I know those guys. Those guys are hard as fuck. You know what I mean? And so, anyways, yeah, those guys are just absolutely.
I thought that
absolutely committed too. So,
and I thought that a venue like Velvet Underground for a band like them is perfect. It's cavernous. It feels like you're in a dungeon, and it really brings out the atmosphere that they have in their music and their stage and everything else. So, I think sometimes when you listen to certain bands live, where you're watching them also plays a role into how everything plays out. Like, you know what I mean? Like if you go see a band and they're on a festival, for example, it's completely different. The sets are shorter. You're playing during the day. The sun is out. Like, you know what I mean? Like there's so many different factors. I think you can't really necessarily judge a band on a one festival performance kind of thing.
Oh no, I mean it's like there's any number of things that could potentially go wrong on any given night. Anybody who plays live can tell you that, you know, whether you have technical problems or whatever it is, you know what I mean? It's not like you get exact, you know, it's not exactly like you get a lot of days off, you know? So things can go wrong. We've had too many problems for me to remember, at least when it comes to us. It's just par for the course. There's nothing you can really do about it. So
yeah, you just have to learn from it. And
you got to advance all the time, Pedro, all the time, you know?
Well, man, it's been an absolute pleasure to talk to you about black metal and to talk to you about the albums that really influence your career and your music and your approach into making music. This was an absolute blast. It's been a long time coming. I was actually waiting for us to do something like this in person because it would have been a lot cooler. I was going to come to your rehearsal space, your crib, and and do something there. But this virus is not letting go. So I figure, you know what? Let me just give you a shout and see if we can do this virtually. So I'm really glad that you took the time to do this.
Absolutely, it's my pleasure, Pedro. And let me extend the invitation now. Once the pandemic is past its
prime,
you're more than welcome anytime to the War Room.
I'll definitely be coming down to check you guys out, and I'm looking forward to the next installment of Panzerfaust. I love my vinyl, and I'll make sure I'm not going to miss the next pre-sale that you guys put together for when you're ready to release the new one. Because I missed the pre-sale on this one, and I had to pull some strings.
Yes, I heard. We were pleasantly surprised that it sold out in 48 hours. I mean,
by the time I saw your post and I went to put my order, you guys were like, the next post I see from you is like, it's sold out. I'm like, shit. Now I really got to pull some strings to get this thing.
We were as surprised as you were, to be fair. But
so I learned my lesson. I'm going to be ahead of the game the next time. So I'm going to make sure I'm not going to miss the boat.
Next time, I think we might print more.
Yeah, I think you guys need to. And another thing I want to do is I want to make sure you guys autograph the poster that came inside that vinyl, so that we can frame it and put it up in our living room. We always got to support our hometown heroes, and as far as I'm concerned, you guys are our hometown heroes.
Well, it's very sweet of you to say. I appreciate that.
Thank you, man. Thank you for your time. All the best.
Yeah, you too, man. Be safe. Cheers.
Take care.